So our first speaker of the day is August Berkshire. August Berkshire has been an atheist activist since 1984. He is a co-founder and past president of Minnesota Atheists, a co-founder and past board member of Camp Quest Minnesota, and a past board member of the Humanists of Minnesota. He is a past vice president of Atheist Alliance International. He is currently the Minnesota State Director for American Atheists and serves on their national board of directors. He is the author of numerous pamphlets and is the owner of the Atheist car license plate for Minnesota. His story is featured in the anthology Atheist Voices of Minnesota. He is proud to be listed in the reference book Who's Who in Hell. Please welcome August Berkshire.
Thanks to the AHA for sponsoring this, and thanks to you for coming. You may have noticed that this is listed in the program as 21 reasons. Well, I submitted that title like 3 weeks ago, and since then I've thought of 4 more things. So think of this as the director's cut. Okay. So first, let's look at the premise. Is God belief dying? Oh, I don't know why these are not home. Is that, it's being cut off. Maybe there's an adjustment we can make here. These look fine on my screen, but they're just PDFs. Yeah, it's good. There we go. That's fine. All right. It's a miracle. All right. So, is God belief dying? Gallup did a number of polls looking at church attendance, a decline in religious importance in life, decline in religious identity, decline in membership, decline in religion's relevance for today, over a 20-year period. And each of them experienced about a 10-point drop. So when you kind of average them together, see a 10-point drop over that period of time. Pew came out 2015, and you see the rise of the so-called unaffiliated. It's the only group that went up significantly between 2007 and 2014. Who are the unaffiliated? About 3% say they're atheists, 4% agnostic, and about 16% nothing in particular. So unaffiliated or nones are not all atheists, but you can see that the number of people calling themselves atheists has doubled, agnostics has gone up. And I think even nothing in particular, a lot of these people would fit into those categories. So again, evidence of the decline of religion and God belief. America's changing religious landscape. People saying they have no religion has really been skyrocketing. When asked about religion's influence on life in the United States, most people think religion is losing its influence. The people saying that that's been increasing. And nobody thinks it's been increasing. That's been going down. Americans are less likely to say religion can answer today's problems. So can it answer the problems? Fewer and fewer say it can. Is religion largely old-fashioned and out of date? More and more people think that it is. Now, Barna Research, I really like Barna Research. They're a Christian research organization. And they're very honest. They'll report horrible statistics for Christianity. Then they'll go and say, oh, but how can we do better? How can we change this? And they never really come up with a good way. But it's really great when you can cite them to support your cause. So they came out last year, they looked at atheism doubles among Generation Z. They defined Generation Z as born between 1999 and 2015. They are the first truly post-Christian generation. This is the Christians who did this. More than any other generation before them, Generation Z does not assert a religious identity. For Generation Z, atheist is no longer a dirty word. The percentage of teens who identify as atheists is double that of the general population. The proportion that identifies as Christian likewise drops from generation to generation. And teens, along with young adults, are more likely than older adults to say that the problem of evil and suffering is a deal breaker for them. Looking worldwide now, countries in gold are places where young people are less religious than old people. Well, look at that. Lots of places. In looking at identifying with a religious group, weekly worship, importance of religion in their life, praying daily. Younger people are less religious. You know, there's a lot where they don't have any info. This gray and white is either no difference or no data. And only in a couple blue countries are older people less religious. The trend is younger people are less religious. This is a Christian chain of stores, and they're closing all 170 bricks and mortar stores. They're still going to operate online, but I mean, this is another sign of the decline of Christianity. From sacred to secular, Canada losing 9,000 churches, and you know, that's the kind of progress we like to see. In Iceland, 0% of Icelanders 25 or younger believe that God created the world. Of those 25 or younger, 93.9% said the world had been created in the Big Bang, and 0% believed that God created the world. 46% identify as religious, which is the lowest figure to date. 40%, 40.5% of people who are 25 or younger said they were atheists, outright said atheists. 40%, and only 40% said they were Christian. So again, religion, God belief is dying. Looking at the Muslim world, we have Maryam Namazi saying there's a tsunami of atheism in the Muslim world. Another article, atheism explodes in Saudi Arabia despite state-enforced ban. Okay, so why is religion declining? 25 reasons that I could come up with. There's a little overlap, but I think each one is distinct enough that I wanted to give it its own reason, and plus I like the number 25. Okay, failure of God of the gaps and the success of science. God of the gaps is this thing that God did it. So God is not an answer because it provides us with no information. We don't know what a God is or how a God accomplishes anything. God raises a series of questions that are more complex than the question it fails to answer. Where did God come from? How can God be a disembodied consciousness? How does God create something from nothing? How does God monitor and control every atom in the universe? So God is merely a placeholder word for the unknown, and it's science that supplies the real answers if they are obtainable. And as the gaps in our knowledge of the universe continue to shrink, God is becoming obsolete. This is an example of that belief in creationism. So people who believe just outright God creationism, that's been going down, and they've been converted to theistic creationists. Okay, evolutionists. They're still believing in God, but not the poof 6,000-year creation, but a theistic view. But also atheistic evolution is increasing. So this is evidence of failure of God of the gaps. They're having to accept the evidence for evolution. So religious people sometimes check or twist science to confirm their beliefs, but scientists never check religion to see if their discoveries are correct. So number 2, less religious indoctrination. Some religious parents get too busy to take their children to church or religious instruction or to pass on many religious beliefs directly themselves. Other parents who aren't religious also don't pass religion on to their children. Since indoctrination is the main way that religion is transmitted from generation to generation, this lack of religious teaching tends to result in children who are less religious than their parents. And most of these children who aren't indoctrinated with God belief in the first place never see a need to pick it up later on in life. So we see a rise of the nuns and college freshmen. Not only are the freshmen becoming lacking in religion, but so are their parents. indifference and irrelevance. People, especially those who are young, just don't see how unsubstantiated stories of invisible beings apply to their lives. They're busy with demonstrably real things, such as school, job, love life, and other interests. These people are sometimes called atheists, emerging of apathy. They just don't care. Why should they? Interfaith contact. Meeting other people who believe as strongly as you do, but in a different religion, exposes the myth of the one true God. Instead, it reveals the power of indoctrination. These contacts with other people of other religions often occur when someone moves from a small town to a big city, or when someone goes from a high school to a university, encounter other people. If one religion were objectively true, wouldn't everyone believe it? And we can see that religion is largely an accident of birth. Okay. Mostly Protestant and mostly Catholic. So this is taking effect in Britain, for example. Losing their religion, the hidden crisis of faith among Britain's young Muslims. You're meeting someone who believes something differently. Physical harm by religion. The belief in a God can lead to evil actions, holy wars, suicide bombings, beheadings, sexual abuse of children, discrimination and violence against women and sexual minorities, prohibitions against life-saving medical treatments. So if a loving God is inspiring these religions, how can things go so wrong? Perhaps the premise is incorrect, and there really is no God, and these religions are just human inventions. That's physical harm. Then we get into psychological harm. The belief that we're not born as neutral or good people, but as sinners. The belief that we can't take credit for the good things we do because of ourselves we can do nothing. The belief that everything bad is our fault, even if we had nothing to do with it, because Adam and Eve, and by extension we, disobeyed a God and somehow brought evil into the world. The belief that a severely judgmental invisible being is spying on us 24/7. Daryl referenced this yesterday. We're made to feel guilty because a Savior supposedly died for us, when that death, even if it was true, is completely unnecessary. And I have a pamphlet back there addressing that. The belief that after we die, we'll be tortured forever in hell. That's psychologically damaging to a lot of people. Treating women as second-class people and coercing them into having sex and babies. Demonizing gays, lesbians, and transgender people. Some religions instruct their followers not to take medications, including medications that might help mental illness. And if belief in God is a good thing, how can it lead to so much psychological harm? Intolerance. Religious people and their creeds are often anti-woman, anti-gay, and anti-anyone who doesn't believe the same religion they do. And many people rebel against such unfairness and judgmentalism. Hypocrisy. When some religious people claim their God is good and pride themselves on being good people because they follow this God, but then act badly, outsiders begin to wonder how useful and true that religion is. Contradictions and cognitive dissonance. God beliefs often contain contradictions, and it can be difficult to maintain belief in two conflicting things. So some examples of contradictions or problems with religion. You have the problem of evil. Why would an all-powerful, all-loving God allow natural evil? Problem of silence. If an all-powerful, all-knowing God wants us to realize he exists, why doesn't he clearly reveal himself? Problem of unintelligent design. If God's all-powerful and all-knowing, why are some things poorly designed? Problem of injustice. Why should all humans be punished for the deeds of two people, Adam and Eve? So although atheists don't claim to know everything, at least atheism doesn't have any contradictions. For example, atheists never have to ask, if God loves me, why are these bad things happening to me? I have to say that's, when people ask me about religion versus atheism, the hardest thing about losing your religion is giving up the afterlife. You can give up just about anything else about God belief. The idea that God answers prayer, you can give that up because, let's face it, he doesn't. But that thing you can't actually disprove, the afterlife. That's like the last thing people give up. But what do you trade for that? And I say, I'll trade that away because there's no evidence for it, a lot of evidence against the afterlife. I really like having a life without contradictions. That's worth so much to me. To not have the confusion some religious people have to believe. So, which holy books, are you going to believe? And they contradict each other. This is fun. So they're giving a little talk here. Churches and Christian movements throughout history, starting at 1 AD, and all these branching. So this is where our movement came along and finally got the Bible right. Jesus is so lucky to have us. So Ian Hershey Ali famously said, the only position that leaves me with no cognitive dissonance is atheism. Okay, economic prosperity. You can see, and we're all pretty familiar with this. The richer nations this is a religiosity scale, the richer nations like Western Europe are less religious, and the poorer nations are very religious. U.S. is a bit of an outlier, I think because of our wealth gap. I think that pulls us up out of the curve. And this is looking worldwide. The less you own, or the less income you have, the more important religion is in your life. So if you're really poor, religion is very important. If you're wealthy, it's a lot less important. And people have been getting wealthier. You can see over the centuries, actually. People living in poverty, that's been going down. Living in extreme poverty, that's been going down. So the poverty has been going down. People are actually, getting better off. However, correlation may not be causation. So it turns out it's not the wealth that's producing the atheism. It's that when you become more atheistic and drop some religious mindsets that you have, especially the big one is if you have a religious mindset that women shouldn't work and you drop that and women get in the workforce, your country really starts to prosper. So here's saying the lack of religion tended to come before the economic growth. Okay. And that wealth itself is not the cause of secularization. However, economic prosperity often makes possible other things that lead to a decline in God belief. So that's why I'm going to keep it in here, because it's still, prosperity is key to some of the other things we're going to be talking about. More general education, which is often tied, not always tied to money, but is often tied to it. So people enrolled in education, that's been going up. You have Western Europe, and this is the global average. So more and more people are enrolled in education. The world literacy rate has been going up, so general education has been increasing. And we find here that in countries where people attend school longer, they go to church less often. There's a bunch of countries in the graph. Average years of schooling, the more schooling you have, the less likely you are to go to church. Declining birth rates. The fewer children you have per family, you have a better living standard per child, more parental focus per child, and more education from parents per child. So the fertility rate has been going down worldwide. The family size has been getting smaller. So you can focus more on each kid because there's not so many of them. And this is they looked at Britain, for example, and they found that children from larger families indeed have lower levels of education. Another thing that's actually leading to the decline in fertility is we're heading toward a male fertility crisis. Sperm counts are dropping, and it turns out that for men, apart from having all the time in the world to become dads, the clock is ticking too. A substantial portion of young men have a sperm count that will impair their fertility. So it really is true, as Monty Python said, that every sperm is sacred. Yeah, the religious people need that body count up so their education goes down so that they'll go to church. Okay, this one kind of surprised me when I thought of it. Gay couples having more children is also a decline of God belief. So they looked at Netherlands, where being gay is very accepted. They were the first country in the world to legalize gay marriage in 2001. Before that, they had partnerships. And it's among the most favorable countries of same-sex couples. So if you're going to compare outcomes from opposite sex to same-sex couples, you want to take away the variables of like the prejudice that might exist towards same-sex couples. You want to look, you're just looking at the variable of the outcomes of the children without any negativity in society. So Netherlands is a good place to look for this. And the results indicate that children from same-sex couples outperform children from different sex couples in primary education. It continues to occur in secondary education. And also, they're more likely to graduate if you're a child of the same-sex couple. Okay. And it turns out that the acceptance that gays are having in the Netherlands is starting to spread, even in the U.S. Looking at support for non-discrimination protections. Most liberals favor it, moderates, even most conservatives are against discrimination for gay people. Even religious, looking at the religious people, looking at like the worst category, white evangelical Protestants, the majority of them still favor non-discrimination for gay people. Wow, what a change, you know. So this is really good news, and leading to the decline of religion, which is even better news. Gay people are less likely to be religious. So gay, lesbian, bisexual, 41% are unaffiliated, and then straight people, only 22% are unaffiliated. Less fear of sickness and death. As societies prosper, they tend to offer better social safety nets to their citizens so that people feel more secure, have better medical treatment, and live longer. Because of this, people feel less of a need to pray to a God when they're ill or have other difficulties. They also feel less sadness at the end of their lives if they have led long, fulfilled ones. Canada, Japan, most countries in Western Europe not only have better social safety nets than the United States, but less God belief as well. And this is where they looked at what they call the suffering index as defined by infant mortality, cancer, death, disease, violent crime. So the greater the so-called suffering index, the more strongly people believed in God. So in New England, where you have, it's a very prosperous part of the country, people are well off, good education, good social safety net. People aren't suffering very much in New England, and there's not a very strong God belief either. Whereas down south, there's more ills going on because they don't have the social safety nets, and they have greater God belief. So there is that correlation between suffering and God belief. And showing that here, weekly worship attendance is most common where life is the shortest, and this is looking around the world. So if you live a short life, as a lot of these African countries do, you're going to attend church more often. Whereas if you're having a good life, you're not going to be attending church as often. Less war, more peace. Many parts of the world, including North America, most of Europe and Japan, have not had a major war on their soil for at least 70 years since World War II. War usually brings death, violence, fear, disease, poverty, starvation, and other suffering. And these things usually tend to correlate with higher religious belief. And we've all heard this so-called, there are no atheists in foxholes. So the fact that we've been in peace, I think, has also contributed to the decline of God belief. Now, we have little asterisks there. The only attack we've had on our soil was 9/11. So what happened in 9/11? This was published in the New York Times the end of November. So 9/11 was in September. So in May, people told Gallup that they attended church. About 41% of the people said that they had gone to church the previous week. Right after 9/11, that jumped to 47. So it goes from 41 to, there's a little spike right after 9/11 to 47. But then by early November, it's back down to about where it was. So there's just a little blip. People were afraid, we're at war, we're being attacked. Church attendance goes up. But then peace comes back. Church attendance goes back down. Secular ethics and morality. Our evolution as a social species provides a motive for us to be kind to each other and to cooperate with one another. We find examples of moral behavior in some non-human animals as well. People are realizing we don't need God belief to be good. And in fact, they are. I mean, this just shows that believing that a growing share of, say, belief in God is not necessary to have good values. In fact, that's a majority of Americans now say you don't have to believe in God to be good. So that's a lot of progress. And that's 6 years. That's a lot of progress. Religious differences of opinion. So if you're going to, you really even can't look at religion for your ethics because there's all these differences, even within a single religion, even within, say, Christianity. I mean, what's the Christian position on embryonic stem cell research? Well, some Christians are for it, some against it. What about death penalty? Some are for it, some against it. You can't use religion as a guide for ethics. There's too many conflicts even with a single religion and between other religions themselves. Britons view atheists as more moral than believers. Can you imagine that? Religion is more harmful than good. And this is where we're headed, folks. This is where we're headed. Okay? I love this. Of course, all groups are becoming less religious, of all ethnic and racial backgrounds. So, including young black people. So, Shanitha Cook, a 32-year-old mother of one, doesn't have a Bible in her house in Marion. If I wanted horror fiction, I'd go look for it, she said. All those things they're telling you in the Bible that make you great, feeding the poor, taking care of children, those are things I still do, Cook said. I just understand I don't need religion for it. This is where young people are at. Even we have a conservative making the case for secular ethics. George Will, a lot of you know, is a conservative commentator. So he was interviewed on a podcast last year. So they said to him, you call yourself an atheist, an amiable atheist, but an amiable atheist is still an atheist. George, I just don't think you need theism to have an ethic. That's all. How do you decide? If there's no external, no objective scale of values, where do you get your values? How do you know virtue when you see it? And George says, I think there are objective standards. That is, there are natural rights. That is, right ways for living for people of our nature if we're going to flourish. This is the Sam Harris argument, more in the moral landscape. That's natural rights reasoning without theism. Turns out complex societies came before moralizing God. People used to think, oh, you need a God to tell us right and wrong or the society will collapse. No. Moralizing gods follow rather than precede large increases in social complexity. So contrary to previous predictions, powerful moralizing big gods and pro-social supernatural punishment, threat of hell, tend to appear only after the emergence of mega-societies with populations of more than about 1 million people. Moralizing gods are not a prerequisite for the evolution of complex societies. But they may help to sustain and expand complex empires after they become established, but they're not necessary to establish civilization. We've come up with a couple secular codes of ethics, the UN Declaration of Human Rights and the AHA, different AHA, humanism and its aspiration. I have copies of both of these back there on the table if you're interested. 17, secular meaning and purpose. People are discovering that their lives can have meaning and purpose, even if they're not the special creation of God, and even if there is no afterlife. Family, friends, and other interests can give us plenty of meaning and purpose in our lives. natural explanations and biases to God belief. Evolution and psychology offer natural explanations as to why we create gods and maintain belief in them. When people realize these biases, they're more likely to question their beliefs. Indoctrination is powerful because, evolutionarily speaking, it's usually a good thing to trust our parents. So that's why the handing down of religion, we're inclined to trust what our parents say. We have a bias toward agency detection as part of our survival instinct. When we see or hear something in nature, we have a tendency to look for conscious agents, friends, enemies, other agents, other animals, because it might save us from a threat. So if you're walking in the forest and you hear a branch break, we just all instinctively turn to see what it is. If it's a friend, fine, no harm done. But if it's an enemy, we get to run away, and our genes get to survive and procreate. So hyperactive agency detection could happen if we don't find these natural beings. We attribute things in nature to an invisible conscious agent, God. And this is taking a natural bias toward agency to a point beyond where the evidence warrants. There are also some psychological reasons that we tend to believe. So typical beliefs, I'm created in the image of a God cares about me, that's good for our self-esteem. That belief makes us feel better. A God explains things in nature, actually it doesn't, but people think it does. A God might intervene to help me. No evidence that there's any God doing that, but people believe it. And that God gives me an afterlife. So these feed into our survival instincts. So these are why we might want to believe in a God. And when we start realizing this, it's okay. God's just wishful thinking. Competition from other things that are more interesting and fun. Relationships, sports, amusement parks, shopping, travel, video games, IMAX 3D movies, internet. Atheist visibility. As more atheists come out of the closet, especially celebrities and intellectuals, their views are becoming more widespread, and it gives other people the insight and courage to follow their doubts and become atheists themselves. So these are some atheists that a lot of you will be familiar with. I'm just going to a lot of science fiction writers, as probably most of you know. I'm surprised at the number of musicians that were atheists. You wouldn't have thought it would be that many. I wouldn't have thought. Comedians, yes, tons of atheists. Oh my gosh. And then some more modern day people. The 21st reason that God belief is dying. Increasing numbers of atheist humanist freethought groups. So there's some international groups and some national groups. I didn't even put all the local groups. So what happens is, let's take this campus. At some point, AHA had a beginning. There's probably a handful of people, I don't know, maybe it's 5 as a requirement or something. 5 people got together and say, let's form a club. We don't believe, let's form a club. So they form the club. So at that point, the group is a response to atheism that already exists. But once the club gets going, then a new freshman comes in, says, I want to join some clubs, looks down the list, atheists, humanists, and agnostics. That looks kind of interesting. And they go and they meet fellow like-minded people, and it helps, if they're on the fence, it can very well help them go all the way over to atheism. So they start as a reaction to existing atheism, but once they're established, they become a place where questioning people can go and get more information, find camaraderie, and they end up creating more atheists. Atheist children coming out to their religious parents. Those religious parents that have a prejudice toward atheists often modify their views when they discover the children they love are atheists. Their reactions can range from becoming more tolerant toward atheists in general to becoming atheists themselves. And a similar phenomenon of acceptance occurs when religious parents discover their children are gay and lesbian. Dick Cheney had to draw the line on his Republican religious hatred when his daughter was a lesbian. Well, I guess they're not so evil after all. My daughter that I love is a lesbian. And same thing happens with atheists. The internet. Arguments against God belief are more widespread than they've ever been before. If you live in a small town, your local library or school library will probably either have no books on atheism, or if they do have books on atheism, they'll be written by religious people. However, the internet allows people to go beyond the physical borders of their communities and discover arguments against God belief. And it's especially true of young people and people in repressive societies like many Muslim societies. So here we have an MIT study, how the internet is taking away America's religion. And they were looking at religious decline since 1990, and they attribute 25% of religious decline to a drop in religious upbringing. We already talked about that. Only 5% to an increase in college education. I would have thought that would have been higher. I'm surprised it wasn't. Increase in internet use accounts for 20%, according to them, of the decline in religion, and unknown causes 50%. This Baylor is a Christian university, Baylor University. I always like to use Christian sources when I can. Internet use may prompt religious tinkering instead of belief in only one religion. The internet exposes many millennials to a broad array of religious traditions and beliefs. It may encourage them to adjust their views or experiment with their beliefs, perhaps adopting a less exclusive view of religion. The more time one spends on the internet, the greater the odds are that that person will not be affiliated with a religion. Daniel Dennett was interviewed. My suspicion is that researchers are underestimating the importance of this new transparency of the internet to critique religion. It takes 20 years to grow a Baptist and 20 minutes to lose one. Mariam Namazi, going back to this article, are you optimistic for atheism in the Islamic world? There's a tsunami of atheism, one that we're seeing more clearly due to social media and the internet, which is doing to Islam what the printing press did to Christianity. 24, ridiculing religion. This is one I thought about from the speaker last night. But I thought about it before, but he reminded me, and I quickly stuck it in this morning, and they were gracious enough to accommodate me. Many people are raised to believe that religion is something sacred that cannot be questioned for fear of going to hell. When these religious people, especially young people, encounter billboards or online material or popular music or a stand-up comedian like George Carlin ridiculing religion, it can shake something loose in them that other means cannot accomplish. And now, the moment you've been waiting for, the number one reason God belief is dying. It's not true. Gods probably don't exist. Theology is a subject without an object. The invisible and the non-existent look very much alike. So religion is losing its power to prevail in society and is now engaged in fighting or accommodating its replacement, secular humanism. So look at how religion has accommodated gay people, for example. It's something that secular humanists have been doing for a long, long time. Now you get, we're an affirming church. You know, they're advertising that they're friendly toward gay people because, you know, the default is that they wouldn't be. So we are influencing religion. They're having to come our way. So we are witnessing the death of religion. We've had various student groups do graveyards of the gods. This is the University of North Georgia Skeptic Society in 2013. They had some gravestones with some gods that have died. Group right here. I don't know if 2013 was your first year, you know, but they have a god graveyard. And that's what it looked like in 2013. They did it again last fall. And in the introduction, we saw that yesterday. The Secular Students of Iowa There's a God graveyard as well. So isn't it enough to see that a garden is beautiful without having to believe that there are fairies at the bottom of it too? Thomas Paine famously said, "The world is my country, all mankind are my brethren, and to do good is my religion." And finally, Katharine Hepburn, "I am an atheist, and that's it. I believe there's nothing we can know except that we should be kind to each other and do what we can for other people." And that's it. We got a little bit of time.
All right, we have about 9 minutes for questions, so just a reminder that you need the mic to ask a question.
Great talk. It's exciting. But I want to play devil's advocate. So you focused in on a post-Cold War world, and you could have painted a similar picture in the late 19th century, early 20th century, but then communism comes in and you equate atheism with communism and you get this rise of anti-atheist sentiment. So if atheism was a futures market and you had to put your retirement in atheism, and you have a rising communist atheist China competing with the US, you have Hindu nationalism in India that's rising, and a tremendously religious and young African continent, would you invest in that futures market, or would you brace for recession?
I still think that atheism is the wave of the future. It's almost difficult to say that China is communist. They have so much capitalism in it now, and they're at least trying to somewhat take care of their people. I think when you have countries competing at each other, and one country takes care of its people and another doesn't, I think the one that takes care of its people is going to outperform the other one in the long run. I'm not an economist, I don't really know, but I think that seems to be the trend, is toward where the democratic socialism, or whatever they call it. I just say capitalism with a lot of social programs. That seems to be the model that works the best. And I think those countries are going to outcompete the other ones.
On your graph with the world wealth and religiosity, you showed the United States was an outlier. I'd just like to say that if you do that within the United States, it looks exactly the same. I mean, economic wealth and religiosity are inversely related. Do you have a graph of that? I didn't see it, but
within the U.S.
Yeah, within the U.S.
No.
Mississippi's the most religious and the lowest, so to speak. Yeah.
I did have a graph that compared a bunch of states in the suffering index. That's probably the closest I came to it.
One more. I'll just verify one thing. In the last 6 years, our chats coming into the Recovery from Religion from Pakistan, from Saudi Arabia, from Morocco have just skyrocketed. And it scares the hell out of us because we don't know what happens to these people, and we don't know if their government's monitoring them. So we really try to help them find a safe way to communicate with us. But it kind of verifies what Maryam Namazi is saying, at least anecdotally.
On the chart showing the countries and their prosperity, do you know if that wealth chart taken back in time would show the same thing, or if, say, the countries that had a Christian foundation had more wealth at the beginning, and you're still seeing that later on after they're slowly secularizing?
That's actually a very good question, and I don't know. I know I live in, speaking of the Muslim world, I live in Minneapolis, in the part of Minneapolis that is a huge concentration of Somali Muslims. In fact, my representative is Ilhan Omar. And, and you go on Facebook and all these right-wingers, oh, Sharia law is coming to America. You know, no, I mean, these are my neighbors. They don't want Sharia law. They want to be good Americans. You know, they want to become citizens. They want to get their kids educated. They want good jobs. I mean, these are really good citizens, or soon-to-be citizens. These are really good people. And I'm not, you know, I have my car It's the atheist license plate. I park it in a parking lot. Never been vandalized. Well, not in the parking lot, elsewhere. But not among the Muslims. So they're very good people.
Hi, I'm Brian. You had mentioned in your talk that religious people tend to disagree a lot about moral issues, and that not being religious makes you have less cognitive dissonance. I'm a little bit suspicious of this. A lot of these moral questions are very hard. Maybe something like non-discrimination of gay people, sure. I think a lot of people who aren't religious agree about that. But do you have information that suggests that people who aren't religious tend to agree more on some of those harder issues?
I do think they tend to agree more because most of them will say they'll follow the evidence. Take the death penalty, for example. The evidence is that innocent people get convicted, that it's racially biased, both in the trial phase and in the administration of the punishment phase. If you're like me and think free will is an illusion, there's another reason not to be killing people for something they couldn't help to do. There's a reason to imprison them so they won't hurt anybody, even if there's no free will. That's a whole other topic. I'll do that next year, maybe. But I think you do get more agreement among atheists because they'll at least try to use evidence-based thinking to reach their conclusions. At least what I see is there's not internal contradictions like you see in religion. You know, God values all the life, everybody's life. We're all God's children, but it's okay to kill some of them. But only God can take life, but we can kill some of them. That's totally at odds. I don't see that kind of hypocrisy or whatever contradictions among atheists.
Any other questions?
So to kind of comment back to your question, I didn't take your point in that way. I thought your point was you can't depend on religion to make your moral and ethical decisions, not necessarily that those who are not religious agree on certain positions. So I think your argument still holds true.
Yeah.
So yeah, that one point I wanted to make on that. Another one is I have not seen where parents are more open and accepting of children that come out as atheist. I see it more who come out as gay, lesbian, bisexual. At least I haven't seen that, and I think sometimes there's even a stronger push towards having a stronger religious presence among their children who are atheist.
And I think you're right about that because the religious people say, well, if you're gay, you can't help it. But if you're an atheist, you can help it.
Yeah, exactly. It's
so
a point of arguments.
I don't think it's a huge factor. I mean, these are all factors to greater and lesser degrees. And I would say, yes, that's a small one.
Mm-hmm.
But in my own family, you know, I came out as an atheist. And it took them a while. They were praying for me and all that. But and I just kept being the same son I had always been. And they finally had to say, well, but my mom was a little confused how an atheist could be a decent person, but she had to admit that they could be.
Yeah.
So she lost some of her prejudice toward atheists.
Oh, that's good. One last thing. This is the first time I heard the term Atheists.
Yeah.
That was great. I don't know if you can speak of where you had heard it the first time or who's kind of bringing that up, because this is great.
Yeah, I don't know who coined it, but I probably heard it 10 years ago. But I don't take any credit for inventing it. I just spread the good word.
All right, that's all we have time for questions.
Right.
Another round of applause for August.
Okay, thank you.